Hi there, welcome back, or welcome for the very first time. You're safe now. This is your time to rest. Let go of your day. Let your breath slow down and your thoughts float gently away. Tonight I'll be reading you a fairy tale, an old story wrapped in moonlight and carried on a quiet breeze just for you. So snuggle in, get cozy, and let the soft rhythm of the story guide you into dreams. Let's begin. Caedmon the Cowherd, a very great modern poet, Coleridge, who wrote The Ancient Mariner, said that prose was words in their best order, but that poetry was the best words in their best order. That is a simple and good definition of poetry. Yet there is even more than best words in their best order in the room beyond the door, over which is written poetry. Perhaps, however beautiful words in their best order would always teach us to find what is beautiful and to love the good. I do not know. Do you? Caedmon's poem, written about 670, marks the beginning of English poetry in Great Britain, for Beowulf was first sung in another land, the land of the conquerors of England, before it was brought to British soil. The verses of Caedmon's poetry are as stormy as the sea which beats at the bottom of the cliffs of Whitby, on which rose the monastery of Straonsalt. Caedmon was at first a servant in this monastery, but when the power to sing came to him, it lifted not only Caedmon himself to something better than he had been, it also lifted the men and women ever since to better ways of thinking and feeling, and to greater happiness than they ever would have had without English poetry. Bede, who wrote about Caedmon, said he did not learn the art of poetry from men, nor of men, but from God. Caedmon sang many songs, chiefly songs about stories in the Bible. Our first poetry was religious. Dark and true and tender is the north, and true and tender is all great English poetry, since that most precious of all the golden doors was thrown open in the great palace of English literature. Almost more interesting than the stories which Caedmon resung for the world is the story of the way the gift of song came to Caedmon. Let's explore that now. One day, a little boy stood by a fishing boat from which he had just leapt. He dug his toe in the sand and looked up to the edge of the rocky cliff above him. "What dost see, lad?" said his uncle, who was tossing his catch of fish to the sand. "Creatures of the mist and the clouds yonder?" "Nay, uncle," answered Finan, "there's no Grendel in the clouds. Last night at the hall a man sang to the harp that Grendel was a moor treader. Also he told the deeds of the hero Beowulf, and he said that Beowulf had killed Grendel." Finan's eyes were on the distant moor, which was the colour of flame in the evening light. Already twinkling above were little stars bright as the sheen of elves. There, he knew, for everybody said so, lived an elf and a giant and a monster. There in the moor pools lived the water elves. Across its flame of heather strode mighty march-gangers, like Grendel, and in the dark places of the mountains lived a dragon, crouched above his pile of gold and treasure. There stood the miraculous tree of great size, on which were carved the figures of beasts and birds and strange letters, which told what gods the heathens worshipped before the gentle religion of Christ was brought to England. There lived the Wolfman too, so friendless and wild that he became the comrade of the wolves which howled in those dark places. There lived a bear, old and terrible, and the wild boar rooting up acorns with his huge curved tusks. Nearer the village was the wolf's head tree, more terrible tree than any in the mysteries of forest and fenland. This was the gallows on which the village folk hung those who did evil. Finan could see the tree where it stood alone in the sunset light, and he heard the rough cawing of ravens as they settled down into its dark branches to roost. "Caw, caw," croaked one raven. "Bad man, bad man." "Caw, caw," sang another raven. "Bad." Then they flapped their wings and settled to their sleep. "Uncle," Finan said, "I will go up the cliffside." The fisherman looked up. He heard the chanting from the church and saw an immense white cross upright on the cliff's edge, but he knew not of what adventure little Finan was thinking. "Aye," said he, "go, perhaps you will see the blessed hild." So it came about that little Finan climbed the cliff on that evening which was to prove a night wonderful in its miracle. There was born that which, like the love of Christ, has made children's lives better and happier. Finan reached the top of the cliff by those steps which were cut into it, and then took the main road, paved and straight, which led toward the great hall. He went along slowly under the apple trees. He saw a black-haired Welsh woman draw water. Little children, not so big as Finan, were sitting on the steps by their mothers, who were spinning in their doorways. He passed a dog gnawing a bone, flung to it for its supper. A cobbler, laying by his tools, looked up, saw Finan, and greeted him. A jeweller was fixing ornaments on a huge horn he had polished. Carpenters were leaving a little cottage which they were building. The road was full of men, swineherds and cowherds, ploughboys and woodchoppers from the forests beyond, gardeners and shepherds, all on their way to the great hall. Some men were there in armour too, their long hair floating over their shoulders. Inside the windows, which in those days contained no window glass, torches and firelight would soon begin to flame, and mead would be passed. Already a loud horn was calling all who were to come. Suddenly something sharp stabbed Finan, and he cried out. A man, a woman, and a little child came rushing from one of the household yards, flapping their garments and screaming, "The bees! The bees!" They had just found their precious hive empty. The bees had swarmed, and unless they could find them, there would be no more sweet-selling mead made from honey in that household that year. Another bee stung Finan, and there they were, clinging to a low apple bough just above his head. They hung in a great cluster, like a dark bunch of grapes. "Dame," said a cowherd who was in the road to the people who were crying out for their bees, "yonder lad knows where the bees are." Finan rubbed his head and looked up at the angry humming swarm. "Aye," he said, and laughed. "Throw gravel on the swarming bees," called the cowherd, Caedmon. The woman and the man and Finan took a handful of gravel from the roadside and flung them over the bees, and sang again and again, "Never to the wood, fly ye wildly more." And then they laughed, and the bees swarmed. "Now," said Caedmon, who was a wise cowherd, "hang veneria on the hive, and if ye would have them safe, lay on the hive a plant of madder. Then can naught lure them away." When they reached the hall, folk were already inside eating. Little Finan saw Caedmon go in quietly, for Caedmon was attached to the Abbess Hild's monastery and had a right to go in and eat. Inside, they were singing for the sake of mirth, and the torches and firelight were flaming. Through the open window, for windows were always open then, and the word window literally meant wind's eye, Finan saw the harp being passed from one to another. They sang many songs as the harp passed from hand to hand, songs of war, songs of home. But when the harp was passed to Caedmon, who had charmed the bees, he shook his head sorrowfully, saying that he could not sing, and got up, sad and ashamed, and went out. Little Finan wanted to shout through the window to him to sing about the bees, but he did not dare, for he was afraid of being discovered. Instead, he followed behind Caedmon. He wished to ask him why he would not sing. This he did not dare to do either, but went on to the fold where the cowherd had gone to care for the cattle. And there, on the edge of the fold, the little boy, unseen by the cowherd, fell asleep. Shortly afterwards, Caedmon too fell asleep. It must have been near the middle of the night, when the stars one and all were shining and dancing with the sheen of millions of elves, and the sea down below the cliff was singing a mighty lullaby. The little Finan started wide awake, hearing a voice speak. "Caedmon," spoke a man who stood beside the sleeping cowherd, "sing me something." Caedmon drowsily answered, "I cannot sing anything. Therefore I went away from the mirth and came here, for I know not how to sing." Again the mysterious stranger spoke, "Yet you could sing." And Finan heard the sleep-bound voice of Caedmon ask, "What shall I sing?" "Sing to me," said the stranger, "the beginning of all things." And at once Caedmon began to sing in a strong voice, very beautifully, the praise of the gods who made this world, and his song had all the beat of sea waves in it, sometimes little waves that lapped gently on the shore and bore in beautiful shells and jeweled seaweed, but more often its rhythm was as mighty as an ocean wave that tossed the big ships. Then the wandering stranger, hearing the beauty of the song, vanished. Caedmon awoke from his sleep, and he remembered all that he had sung and the vision that had come to him. He was glad. He arose and went to the Abbess Hild to tell her what had happened to him, the least of her servants. In the presence of many wise men did Hild bid Caedmon to tell his dream and sing his verses, and he did as he was told. And it was plain to all that an angel had visited Caedmon. The Abbess Hild took him to the monastery, and she ordered that everything be done for him, and Caedmon became the first and one of the greatest of the English poets. And even as Christ was born in a manger in Bethlehem, English poetry was born in a cattle fold in a town which was called Storytime, which means Bay of the Beacon. And to mankind since Caedmon, The first English poet, English song has been a beacon to the world. The end. The story has ended, but your dreams are just beginning. Let them carry you gently through stars and silence and soft wonder. Thank you for letting me read to you. I'll be here again whenever you need a quiet voice and a gentle tale. Sleep well, sleep deep, and good night, dear dreamer. Breuddwydion melys, dear dreamer, sweet dreams.